Well, hello, I'm Dr. Patrick Hickey, or Dr. H, as many of my students refer to me. It has been my true pleasure to be the host of International Service Learning Experiential Medical Education. Our goal has been to hear the voices of those that have been involved in international service and healthcare. And after a recent review of 27 episodes that began in November of 2025, I can easily see that we are meeting our goals. This summer, I want to revisit and re-edit some of those episodes, as each and every episode is quite unique, with all sharing a very common theme, that of stepping out of one's comfort zone and advocating for an underserved population that does not have a voice. Today, I am revisiting an episode that was originally released on April the 26th. The title of that episode, Build a Medical Career by Serving Abroad, is very fitting, as my guest for that episode, Bryce, truly had his life change while on a service learning trip to Belize in February of this year. Bryce was part of an inaugural med student gap year student trip to Belize, and he shared with me that it was this experience that really opened his eyes to the potential that he had to be an MD. This experience was so powerful for Bryce that he wanted others to have a similar experience. So he is now leading an inaugural gap year student trip to Tanzania in September of this year. Of course, there were many reasons that his February experience was so memorable. Uppermost, though, for a pre-med student was the fact that he and his cohort were able to rotate through various specialty areas in a hospital where they shadowed and collaborated with the physicians, all of whom were very supportive of the students. Bryce has arranged the same opportunity in Tanzania, Africa. I hope that you enjoy Bryce's podcast and that you can hear the passion in his voice. Check out his videos on Instagram at ISL Medical, where he shares more of his plans for Tanzania. Well, I'm real excited today to have a guest with us that's got some adventures coming up, and he's going to be sharing them with us. But I've known Bryce for a couple of years now, I believe, through the University of South Carolina. Bryce, but before we get going to learn about your service learning trips and some of the plans you got coming up, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, why you came to the University of South Carolina, what your major was, and what your plans are moving forward.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you first for having me. But my name is Bryce. I'm from Fort Mill, South Carolina. I attended the University of South Carolina. I grew up in a whole family of Gamecocks. So for me, the USC was kind of, I was born into the life. But I came into South Carolina as a biology major, and I knew I wanted to do something in the health science field, mainly in medicine. But it was really when I first started volunteering that kind of cemented the fact that I wanted to do the MD route. And so I graduated last December, and I graduated in 3.5 years. And then I've been working since then for Propel Clinical, doing clinical scribing at MUSC with a specialty in cardiology.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Every person comes on is obviously very unique. Talk to us about the medical scribe process, because it's something I see a lot of healthcare focused students doing as they're in their undergrad.
Yes, sir. Well, I thought it was a really interesting thing. Going into the summer before my senior year, I was really looking to increase some clinical experience on my med school resume. And so I thought I was looking at all the options, and there was like EMT, MA, and clinical scribing. And EMT and MA is like, I didn't have a certification yet, and I kind of wanted to get right into it. And so I found a company that contracts with MUSC named Propel Clinical, and they trained me, and then I was trained on site as well to scribe. And I think it's been really helpful. You get a one-on-one kind of mentorship with the physician you work for, but then at the same time, I have a really good understanding of the specialty I was in, and then a really good understanding of how medical documentation works, as well as using the Epic user face, which I think will give me a really good jump start when I start my clinical rotations and in my residency.
What a wonderful opportunity to kind of get a look, so to speak, at what your future could be, because you're basically working with a physician that's going through the rounds, and you're learning about the diagnostics tests that they're utilizing. You're learning to interpret some of those diagnostic tests, and then you're seeing that physician's rapport with the patients.
Yes, sir. I think one of the best things was I shadowed throughout undergrad, but for shadowing, you might be there for a day to a week. I never really had an extended shadowing. And with scribing, although I was doing work, typing the notes, prepping the charts, and like in the room pending orders with the physician, I thought it was really cool to see. I saw patients over the past year at MUSC cardiology and seeing their return visits and kind of how their health changes over time, as well as the rapport they have with the doctor. I saw some patients that came in on monthly basis, some that came on 6 months and yearly. And I think the coolest part was seeing some of those people that came very frequently that I continued to see, trying to build my own rapport with them, as well as the most shocking thing was the physician I worked for. He was more at the end of his career as a physician. And so he's seen patients that were coming in that he's seen longer than I've been alive. So I thought that was really cool to see the trust the patients had in the physician, and also on the other side, how the physician also had respect for the patient.
Wow, for a pre-med student, this sounds like a gift. And
Yes, sir. No, I highly recommend scribing for any pre-med that's looking for mentorship and as well as more clinical
and they
experience.
paid you for this, right?
Yes, sir. It is paid. That was one thing. I volunteered and was doing that to get my clinical experience. So getting a little bit of payment on the side was definitely nice.
That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing. That's a good shout out to all the pre-med kids. Look into scribing opportunities, correct?
Yes, sir. 100%. Propel Clinical if you go to the University of South Carolina.
Excellent. Well, listen, the topic of us getting together is to talk about service learning, and I know you've been on a couple of different trips. So tell us about your first service learning trip and what motivated you to sign up for that.
Yes, sir. Well, my first service learning trip was spring break of my junior year, so last spring, and I was in the pre-med fraternity called Phi Delta Epsilon, and they organize a trip every year. And I remember during the recruitment process, some of the members were telling me about how they were planning to go on a trip for that year, and I was really interested in it. And that was one of the biggest reasons that I had found interest in joining the fraternity. And when the time came along my junior year, I had a spring break that I didn't really have anything planned, and the opportunity to go to Costa Rica was presented. And so I was in Alajuela, Costa Rica for 1 week. That was my first one.
And your second service learning trip, can you tell us about that one?
Yes, sir. So with me graduating in December of 2025, this past February, I was in my gap year, and Dr. Hickey actually came up with and presented me the idea of a pre-med and or not a pre-med, a gap year and medical school combo trip. And I thought that I think one of the biggest things in medicine is mentorship. And so I had the idea to kind of join in, and I had to work around my schedule a little bit and get my time scribing kind of covered. But I went to Belize for a little over a week, and this one was a way different. We had not just the community visits, but with the med students, we were able to incorporate hospital time too. So I got to see inpatient in the hospital as well as do the free health service clinic. So I think that was the biggest life changing service trip I've ever had for my path to medicine, and especially what really stands out to me was the combo trip having those medical students. I now have 5 medical students that will mentor me for the rest of my life. I stay very in contact with them, and that was to me the biggest part of that service
Well,
trip.
yeah, I'm glad you share that about the mentorship because, again, I've known you for a few years and I do a lot of mentoring, as you know, myself at the University of South Carolina. And many times we've done a handoff. I've worked with you to,
Hmm.
help tag team, so to speak, on mentoring. I can only do so much. Then I would recommend a few students to follow up with you. And you were always so timely about looping back to me and saying, "Hey, I met with so and so. Here's where we're at. Here's what we did," and then you got to experience it in Belize, being mentored
Yes,
by
sir.
the med
Yes,
students.
sir.
So full circle, and that's
Yes, sir.
fantastic.
I think within medicine too, it is throughout your entire career a full circle of being a mentee and a mentor. Like as a pre med, I had people like you and these med students and the physician I scribe for, and like older members of my pre med fraternity being mentors to me. And then it kind of changed as I became an upperclassman, where I was mentoring some of your younger students. But I think this continues as like as a first year resident. you're going to have older residents mentoring you and attending physicians. And then as you go, keep continuing, there's always people to mentor you as well, but you have to also pay it back as
Well,
a mentor to
well,
the
I
younger.
like your sentiment that you always have to pay it back. That's a wonderful sentiment. I feel the same way, but unfortunately, in our present system, it's a challenge to be mentored by physicians in their daily practice because
Yes,
they're all
sir.
so busy. And I think we're creating a new generation of healthcare providers, with people like yourself and others that learn the value of mentoring, at an early juncture, and then hopefully as you move forward through your career that you'll be mentoring too. My hope is that, 5, 6, 8 years from now, and someone comes up and says, "Hey, Dr. Bryce, I've got a high school kid here today. Would he be able to shadow
Mhm.
with you?" And I hope your response is going to be, "But of course," because
Yes, sir. No,
we need that.
uh, of course. No, I think at least for me, like I had no family in medicine, and so when I first got to the University of South Carolina, that was like the one thing I needed to find was kind of guidance within medicine because there was no one to tell me how to study for the MCAT. There's no one to tell me like how to get shadowing, and so I think coming from at the beginning having no connections to the field at all, that's something like absolutely as an attending, I would be more than honored and willing to help anyone shadow. That's definitely a goal of
Well,
mine.
you've had a recent dilemma in the last 6 months to a year where you've developed a wonderful relationship with your mentor, who's a cardiologist, and
Yes,
wants
sir.
wants you to come over to the dark side of cardiology, whereas you have let him know that your interest is orthopedics. So who's winning that tug of war?
I don't know. When I my last day on Wednesday at the clinic in Columbia with him, he asked me the same question at the end, and I said it's almost 50-50 now. Like I would consider trying to double match and just let the match choice pick which one for me.
Well, it all comes down to quality of life. And, when you have very passionate mentors like you've had, the tendency is, I want to have what they have, and they got that passion because of
Yes,
what
sir.
they're doing. So, I always say never. And that's a good way to leave it with your mentor. Now, you've been on a couple of service learning trips. Obviously, you've met and dealt with a lot of patients. What stands out? Was there, I mean, from your first or second trip, are there any situations, scenarios, patient care stories that resonate with you?
Yes, sir. So I have a couple from both ends, from both trips. The first one in Costa Rica, my overall like when I that was my first time like truly leaving the country, and so I was really just starstruck at everything. I've never been in communities like that, but the one thing that continues to happen every service trip, whenever I go to some of these places, I'm always starstruck at the fact that they might not have like the same house I have, the same technology I have, or anything, but everyone's just so happy, and it's just throughout the whole thing, it's just all great spirits the entire time. Like everyone I've met, whether that be a patient, whether it be children within the community that weren't patients that I played like soccer with, or the physicians, or the translators, or even the tour guides. Um, like everyone is just so happy, and like I think that's also comes with while you're serving others, you get that joy. But it just that's the biggest thing that I think stood out throughout all of it was everyone's just so happy, and there's just so much spirit and just so much goodwill being done. But then being a little bit more specific with specific patients in Costa Rica, the one that will always resonate with me was we went into it. We were doing our community visits and doing our house visits before the first day of clinic. And this is my first time in this community. I walk into this house, and it was made with like semi-permeable material, and it was more of a farming community. And there was a child kind of hung up with like ropes and like cords in a little baby carrier, but that child ended up having cerebral palsy.
Mm.
And so that was something that I really kind of was able to take it all in at once. And I was in the middle of Costa Rica. There was not like a major hospital anywhere close to us, and they're managing a child with cerebral palsy. Whereas in the United States, like being from Colombia, we have like Prisma Richland and like these huge hospitals with all the technology, all the scans, all the physicians, all the research, all localized. And so that was my biggest thing. You could really see that there's a discrepancy for some of the access that we have in the United States compared to they have in different countries. And then going into another one in Belize, I think for me, the biggest thing that I took away was being inside those hospital wards. I was used to in Colombia these massive hospitals that are multiple stories. In Belize, it was like one story, and there was like indoor and outdoor. So like you walked under like breezeways to get into a different department. And like I remember they had like 6 beds, and so it was their medicine ward, and it was split up like medicine men, medicine women, surgical men, surgical women. And there was, I want to say, like 6 beds in each of those 4 things, and then like 2 contamination beds. And so, like, you walk into a big hospital in the United States, and there's floors for those subspecialties, and whereas there it was kind of all in one. And so, I think the biggest takeaways I had is just the difference in access and utilities and equipment between the two being foreign and being in the United States.
Well, it's an amazing, great observation on the happiness. Know that the good majority of those people are very appreciative that you have gone out of your way to come to see them. And you probably never thought about that. You gave up your spring break, friends were off somewhere partying. You spent money, you went to an underserved area, in this case, never been out of the country. You went into an impoverished area and you rendered healthcare. So they're just so happy that you have extended yourself in a service format to reach out to them. And yes, it is a good observation also that they may not have half or a quarter of what we have, but they're happier than we are. And
Yes, sir, completely.
sometimes the more valuables we have, the more headaches we have. So it's that simpler life sometimes that these people experience that we wish that we could have. I've had many times where students have come back and have been very challenged. I've got a cell phone, I'm connected, I've got a car, I've got a home. I feel so bad. But know that these people are very happy and appreciative that you came by. And also in your second story, know that they can do so much with so little. I mean, they probably rigged up that device for that child, and they're doing as best they can for probably what could have been a very complex medical situation that would have been handled completely different in the United States. And I've done so many of these trips. I'm humbled every time I come back from these trips, and
Yes, sir.
it's just great that you had that observation. What was it like working with the healthcare professionals, both in Costa Rica, the team you work with, and then maybe more importantly, the team you work with in Belize? What was that process like?
So in Costa Rica, we had doctors or 2 physicians and then a pharmacist come visit and spend the days with us while we did the community clinics. And they were amazing. And I honestly, both trips, the physicians and the providers that came with us were amazing. But more specifically in Costa Rica, I feel like there, all of us were pre-med students. And for the most part, majority of us had experience in healthcare in the United States. And so we were able to do their workups and everything pretty smoothly, but they were phenomenal at teaching as well. Like I remember that was my first time really doing like taking a patient history and doing a presentation with the physician. And so the physician worked a ton with me on making sure my presentation came smoothly and clean and I covered all my parts. And so I think the big thing for them was like teaching us, and they accomplished that tenfold. It was amazing. In Belize, I got
Bryce,
excuse me,
before
sorry.
you go into Belize, let me just touch on that point about presentation to a physician. I spoke to a fourth year med student recently who said they had been on an ISL trip, had had the same experience as you had had when they were an undergrad. Now they're a fourth year med student, and they shared that they did not learn how to do a presentation to a physician until their fourth year of med school. And
Oh wow.
you learned it in your undergrad as a junior, which is so
Yes, sir.
cool.
Yep. And it was cool too. Like I have a little bit of background in speaking Spanish, so I could do a little bit. I could kind of flip between the two. There were some words and terms, especially on the medicine side, that I didn't know, but I was really able to kind of get what they were saying to me in Spanish and present to the physician in English. So I thought that was really cool on the side to also work on my Spanish speaking
Well,
skills.
that's great that you got that process, that presentation to a physician experience in Costa Rica. And I apologize, I didn't mean to cut you off. You were just going
Oh, no
on to
worries.
Belize, and in Belize.
Yes, sir. And in Belize, I kind of break the trip up into 2 different points. We had the clinics and then the hospital. So in the clinic, it was the same thing. We had physicians and a pharmacist come join us in the clinics. And again, they were phenomenal with teaching me. I remember for them in Belize, I worked a lot with the physician on proper diagnoses, and it was really interesting. She was a pain doctor, and so we had a lot of pain patients come in with like sciatica pain or joint pain, and she was able to teach me, and I got to watch her do some pain relief, like with mobility and stuff like that on the patient. And I thought that was the coolest thing. And she was so happy to share about like her specialty and kind of how she treats pain in the field, which was really interesting to see. And then on the hospital side of it, we had a ton of physicians that were more than willing to help. And so I worked in internal medicine and then general surgery. And so for internal medicine, the two physicians that came and spoke with us and like kind of walked us through the patients there were amazing. And again, they were just so happy and inspiring to teach, which was awesome. But I really saw my biggest moments in the general surgery and the OR. I was lucky enough, I was able to sit in on a handful of cases. And not only did I have the surgeons there teaching me and like explaining and walking me through the cases, I had medical students, but that were able to give advice. But overall, I had, or like over all of that, there was a orthopedic surgeon that rotates between the hospitals, I believe, and he set me down, and we had a pediatric wrist fracture. And so he set me down, walked me through his entire step by step of surgery. He would retract stuff to let me get up to the table and view. But then the best part was after me and him sat in his office after, and he pulled up all the pre-op and post-op imaging on his computer. And he explained all of that. And me and him were able to have like a review session on like the different types of fractures and what they see commonly in Belize and how they treat it. And so like that right there was like the best one-on-one training and like in-person teaching I experienced throughout all of them. And I will forever remember that working through those fractures with
Isn't
him.
that great that that physician took the time to sit down and do that with you? And I know that you're gonna, as you mentioned earlier, pay it forward and do the same somewhere down the line with someone else
Yes,
and
sir.
make their experience. Sounds like you had a fantastic experience. I'm sure you're making a lot of people saying, "I wish I was on that trip."
No, and I hope they do. It should be something like at least it's done so much for me going on these mission trips. I advise everyone and encourage everyone to try to just step out your comfort zone because I mean the first time for me leaving the country I was stepping out my comfort zone, but I feel like every time I've stepped further and further out of it, I've experienced more and more, and there's more perspectives and more things that will only help me further in my career.
And again, that is a common theme I see amongst a lot of the pre-med students, stepping out of your comfort zone, and doors
Mhm.
of opportunity will open for you, if you push yourself a little bit, and by doing so, you're gaining fantastic experience. It is increasing your self-confidence and your self-esteem, which is fantastic. How has this changed your perspective on healthcare? In the United States, because you're already kind of sort of working in the system in the United States. You've been a medical scribe. Now you've been to two underdeveloped or developing countries. How has this experience with the patient population, the lack thereof of resources, affected you moving forward?
Yes, sir. Well, I have a couple different points for that. I think first off, I continue to work on my Spanish speaking skills, and as time continues, it's only going to be more beneficial for me to be able to speak Spanish as well in the United States, especially in the southern parts of the U.S. And so I think getting one-on-one experience and like hands-on experience using Spanish in a clinical setting was very beneficial and something I definitely will keep continuing within my career. And then I think secondly, I think just viewing, like you said earlier, and I think you said it great, how much they can do with so little is something I really want to keep in mind. Like I remember going back to the orthopedic surgeon, we didn't have a handheld X-ray or a portable X-ray to use in the OR, and so he was able to do it all manually. And so I think it only will continue to improve my skill if I'm able to not just rely on the super fancy equipment in the OR or like in like the ER doing an exam, and also taking it back kind of to the roots of medicine. It is a kind of a humbling thing. And then thirdly, I think just the overall humility and like how humble I was and like was coming back from that trip. I always am going to be so grateful for what I have here, but I also know that there are communities and people in need of healthcare and assistance. And so like for me, global health has been like a huge stamp now on my application, I'd say. And like I want to continue doing mission trips as I continue to get older. And like for me, like working with like a Doctors Beyond Borders or something as an attending physician is definitely kind of in my deck of cards,
Well,
hopefully now.
I can definitely feel your passion for global health, and I can see that your experiences have left an indelible impression upon yourself, and that's only going to better serve your patients moving forward, as you said, by becoming bilingual, by learning Spanish, by joining Doctors Without Borders, or continuing to do what you're doing in the future. That's huge. Fantastic experiences that you've had, Bryce. Well, for students that are considering a similar trip that may be sitting on the fence, wondering, maybe a little expensive, I'm not sure if it will help me or not, what would your advice to them be?
I think first, like if you're nervous more for like the leaving aspect of like leaving the US, leaving kind of like your bubble and what you're safe to, I would say I was as nervous as you leaving to go to Costa Rica, but like I said, stepping out of that comfort zone is always going to be beneficial for you, and experiencing new things is always going to be beneficial. And I think too, it's such a great time as a pre med to do it early, like because as you continue to go through the journey of medicine and as you get into medical school, you get into residency, it's only going to be more and more time consuming. And so I think the best time to do it is as an undergrad when you have the extra spring break or the extra time in summer to go take that step. But I think overall, just if you look at all the testimonies from the people that have went and done mission trips like this, they're always so positive and they've impacted us so much. And so, like, I know sometimes costs can be a restriction, and there are, I know, like, I used a scholarship at USC to help cover the first one, but there are ways to kind of help reduce that. But at the end of the day, it's just it's like so beneficial to me. And I think also just to like how I view everything now. I think the benefit you get from it is unmatched.
Well, and yeah, again, I hear your passion. I appreciate that. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be tripping over each other to go on these trips now because of what
Hopefully.
you shared. Well, I alluded in the beginning as we chatted that you had some major plans coming up in addition to your service learning trips. You're kind of already paying it forward. Tell us about an opportunity you've got coming up here real soon.
Yes, sir. Well, so real soon, me and behind the scenes, we've been working on doing a gap year plan going to Tanzania, Africa for 2 weeks. And it's going to be a little bit more similar to what I did in Belize, where we have clinic and we have hospital rotations. I felt like the hospital rotations as a hopefully a future MD were really what I was looking for. I really wanted to see that inpatient, like true medicine care. And so it's going to be, I want to say a 60-60-33 split between 66 hospital and 33% clinic. So you get kind of the best of both worlds. And as well, it will be going to Tanzania, Africa. So I was always like a Nat Geo wild kid growing up. And so the safari and Africa was just like one of the destinations I always had marked on my list. So I think that everyone that, if you're willing to come, I think it'll be a great
So
experience.
you had such a great time on the two service learning trips that you wanted to get back, and now you're leading a trip. You're going to Tanzania.
Yes, sir.
The dates on that, Bryce, are
I can
well,
double check with you real quick.
I can pull up.
It's September 14th. I want to say to September
No,
20th.
September 7th to September 20th.
7th.
There we go. I've
Sorry.
got the flyer in front of me. Right now, the cost is $29.95. I'll be posting the flyer on Instagram. You're the trip leader. So there's some
Yes, sir.
optional recreational excursions, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro if you're in condition for that, which you are. You're training for an Ironman triathlon, I know. A
Yes, sir.
safari, hot air balloon, a lot of potential optional recreational excursions, and
I know.
that's what the ISL trips are all about. I mean, you work real hard, but then you play hard too, and some of those are
Yes, sir.
optional. And if students
I know.
want more information, you'll be able to share that with them. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. If reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to any of y'all. I can show y'all the itinerary and like all the tentative plans we have. And I do know a big thing as well is kind of the play hard side of it too. And so there are built in to that cost already. I know we are doing like a hot spring, a coffee tour, and then another waterfall as well on the first weekend.
Yeah, we always want to make sure there's cultural activities. But the unique thing about the Tanzania trip is the hospital rotation. And
Yes, sir.
that's going to be amazing to kind of sort of replicate the experience that you had in Belize. I don't think language is an issue where you're going,
Yes, sir.
and the culture is going to be amazing. I've seen previous trips to Tanzania, and that's just fantastic. What?
And we do know the specialties too for those wondering in the hospital. And so it'll be surgery, orthopedics, emergency, pediatrics, and then general medicine.
So this is targeted for gap year students, and the reason
Yes,
I
sir.
believe the reason we're doing this with international service learning is we've found that a lot of students that are in their gap year have not had the opportunity that you had during their undergrad. They worked hard on their grades. They did what they needed to
Hmm.
do. They got through academically. Now they're taking a year off, maybe working in healthcare, doing something, but yet they've never had this opportunity to get maybe shout a little bit, but very rarely did they have a hospital opportunity where you had physician mentors. Here's that
Yes,
opportunity. Is
sir.
that correct?
Yes, sir. Completely. Like I was able to squeeze that first one while I was in undergrad to Costa Rica over a spring break. But like I knew I like the same as I bet many other pre-meds and people in their gap year now experience like just like you said, I was so busy or studying for the MCAT, working on classwork that like I really couldn't set aside a couple weeks to leave the country. I wasn't able to go to Belize until I was graduated. And so I think as a gap year student, when you do have the extra time, this is the perfect just like final stamp to that med school
So
resume.
that's a fantastic price, $29.95. I mean, that doesn't include some of the options that we talked about,
Yes,
some
sir.
excursions, but students can get more information from you on that. It's a 2 week trip. Normally there's 7 or normally 9 or 10 days, but you've got to fly so far. The nice thing about
Yes,
going
sir.
to Tanzania, should people want to do this, it's in September. You can jump from Tanzania to mainland Europe or to travel to other places, which is a nice
Yes,
option
sir.
too.
And when I spoke to the in-country coordinators in Tanzania, they told me that September was like the perfect time to be
Oh,
in
there you
Africa.
go.
And so they said Tanzania in September, the wildlife is like amazing at the time. The temperature is not too bad, and like overall, this is that was like that was the time frame that they gave me. They're like, this is the best time to
Well,
experience the
this sounds
country.
like a bucket list trip of a lifetime to go to
Yes,
Tanzania.
sir.
And I know how hard it is for pre-med students. I've worked with them pretty exclusively for the last 15, 20 years. I know how much sacrifice you put into working on your grades, doing well in the MCATs. This is an opportunity to treat yourself, so to speak.
Yes,
To
sir.
go on a trip like this. A little bit of conditioning required to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, but if people are so
Yes, sir.
interested, you can help them with that. It'd be kind of cool if you did go on this trip to climb Kilimanjaro. It is one of the 7 summits of the world.
Yes, sir. I was inspired to climb it from you, Dr. Haney. So you planted that seed for me. But I do want to add too, I know with the safari, it is going to be around the Ngorongoro crater, which is one of the most, this from my Nat Geo Wild research, but is one of the most like wildlife biodiverse places in the world. And so it'll have all of the major wildlife game that you'd see in Africa. So all the bucket list animals that you always saw in the zoo and everything, we'll see them in their natural habitat within this crater. And so it's going to be completely different than going to see like a lion at the zoo, is what they told me.
Having been there and done it, and I did the Ngorongoro crater also, it is fantastic capitalized. It's an unbelievable once in a lifetime experience. So I highly recommend it. I'll be posting the graphic on Instagram, so people will have your number. I'm hopeful a lot of people will be calling for information. Anything else you want to share with us, Bryce, before we sign off? I mean, I could go on and on. I love your passion for everything you shared.
Yeah, so I just want to reemphasize that like I stepped out of my comfort zone. When I would encourage all of y'all that are on the fence about to do it as well. This has been so impactful into my career and just myself in general. Like it's really opened my eyes. And so I encourage every single one of y'all if you're able to and willing to either come to Tanzania or look at other trips throughout ISL is really the kind of impacted me just like completely. And
Well,
I encourage everybody.
I would also, since I'm going to be posting your number, for those that are interested in the trip, reach out to Bryce also for pre-med information. I mean, he's a wealth of
Yes, sir.
information, and you just don't see people or meet people like Bryce very often that are so willing to pay it forward and to help other people. And I just think we'd be a much better world if we had more Bryces in the world.
Well, I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Well, Bryce, thank you for your time so much. I'm so excited. I'm looking forward to following your journey to Tanzania, and I'm so wish I would be returning with you, but it'll be a unique experience for you, and I'll enjoy seeing those travels.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you for having me today. It was amazing to be able to talk to everybody and promote
You
this
have a
trip.
good day. Thank you.
Thank you. You as well.
I want to sincerely thank Bryce for his willingness to join us today on the International Service Learning Experiential Medical Education podcast. But most importantly, I want to thank Bryce for the passion that he has shared with us. Bryce is a great ambassador for international service learning, and I'm hopeful that by sharing details from his service learning trips that he has inspired students to step out of their comfort zone and to pursue similar opportunities.